My name is Benjamin Hines, and I'm a student at Texas A&M University Central Texas in the Marriage and Family Life program. A narrative therapist is someone who promotes and empowers people and families by emphasizing their story. The narrative therapist seeks to assist people in discovering new strategies and solutions for their lives by co-creating and co-authoring new stories. The problems in people's lives are external to people themselves. So in narrative therapy, problems are attacked as a team, the therapist together with the client, utilizing the client's strengths and resources. The therapist uses questions to help clients create a new narrative and a new dominant storyline in which they are successful. The problem is left outside of the new narrative. A key to co-authoring with clients a new narrative or an alternate story is a process of moving away from a thin problem story toward a new and rich, thick solution story in which the problem is not supported or sustained. Misperception or criticism of narrative therapy is that it's sectarian. Doan and Flaskus in 2000 said that narrative therapists mimic devotion shown to religious or political factions. Crago and Crago published in 2000 that narrative therapy commands evangelical fervor. And someone else, Stagel, wrote in 98 that talking about narrative therapists, I fear I can smell the incense of a new church seeking converts. All of these are comments that denounce narrative therapists and they denounce those who link their lives to such religious or political groups. These comments mock faith and they mock commitment. They imply that thought and reason have been deserted. As narrative therapists, we're not any more sectarian than any other group. We just happen to believe in our therapy model. Another misconception or criticism of narrative therapy is ethical superiority. In narrative therapy, Flaskus, Larner and Flaskus wrote in 2000 that narrative therapists dismiss systemic thinking. Doan wrote in 1998 that narrative therapists have created an inner circle of therapists who considered themselves real and authentic, as if everyone else is not real, not authentic. So this is just a misconception completely. Narrative therapy, it's not superior. It does embrace ideas like transparency, collaboration, and accountability. We believe those are ingredients for good practice, but so do many others. So that's an unfortunate misconception. I'm really fascinated with narrative therapy and its description of the thick and thin storylines. It makes a lot of sense to me. A thin storyline, thin description is basically a problem story. So let's say a couple comes into me, and early on I'm meeting with them, and so many times I hear about the problem, and the couple or the person has already attached meanings to that problem, and these meanings consist of what narrative therapists call a thin description. A thin description allows little space for the complexities of life. It allows little room for people to articulate their own beliefs about their actions and the context within which those actions occurred. Thin descriptions are often labels. They're generated by others. They confine and define a person. Many times these thin descriptions of people's actions or identities are created by parents or teachers, doctors, peers, sometimes the court system. And sometimes people impose these thin descriptions upon themselves just to understand their own actions. In whatever context this thin description is created, they always have significant consequences. A thin description that leads to thin conclusions about people's identity. They have many negative effects. For example, let's say students' words and actions in the classroom are thinly described by his teacher, maybe by some peers, as a troublemaker. He's quickly seen by the whole class and possibly even himself as a troublemaker. This is a thin conclusion about that person. It has negative effects, not only in relation to the student's experience of himself, but also in relationship between the student and his peers. So a thin conclusion takes hold and becomes very easy for people to engage in gathering more evidence to support this dominant, problem-saturated, thin storyline. The influence of these problematic, thin stories can then become bigger and bigger. So in the process, anytime the person has acted contrary to the problem or contrary to this thin description, those accounts are kind of brushed aside. Instead the problem, the troublemaker storyline, gets emphasized and becomes bigger and bigger, more powerful, affecting even future events. Thin conclusions often snowball and they lead to more thin conclusions about who people are, their skills, their abilities, their knowledge, their competencies. All of these are hidden by a thin problem and storyline. So the contrast to this, and what we work for as narrative therapists, is a thick alternative story. When initially faced with a thin narrative problem, we're interested in conversations that seek out a thick alternative storyline. So the narrative therapist creates conversations, stories of identity that assist people to break free from the influence of thin descriptions and to write a new story. These thin descriptions, just as thin descriptions create problems, so also thick alternate storylines create solutions. In therapeutic conversation, alternative stories are unearthed, and we assist the client in addressing the problems that the client's dealing with. So this rich and thick description, this rich and thick storyline, is something that we work together with the client to do. We re-author an alternative story. And narrative therapists help the client develop these alternate stories over time, emphasizing all the richness that are going on in their solution. There are many ways to grow these thick alternative storylines. One way is to articulate in detail all the different aspects of a person's life. We can develop their motives. We can talk about that for a while. We'll talk about their character. We'll talk about their history, what really occurred, what's really going on. We will develop how their life is interwoven with the stories of other people and events. And through all this, we will create a thick and rich description that provides a solution to the problems in their world. A couple, and I'll just call them Bob and Sue, not their real name. They came and sat down with me, and during the first session provided me with a thin narrative. It went just like this. Sue said, "Bob is an irresponsible and neglectful husband and father. All Bob does at home all weekend is play video games." This is Sue talking, "I am very frustrated and angry. I'm ready to leave Bob because he refuses to help clean the house, to help cook, or take care of the kids." So this is a thin narrative. This is Sue's thin narrative, and Bob has started to believe it. And the bottom line of the problem story is Bob is an irresponsible and neglectful husband and father. It's a common thin description. It obscures all the other qualities about Bob. There's much more to Bob than just being an irresponsible and neglectful husband and father. That's only picking on a couple instances. So we can really develop a thick storyline here, a rich and thick solution. So here's how I did it with Bob and Sue. I said to them both, I said, "I want you to brainstorm with me about times in which Bob was a partner and a team player supporting Sue and supporting the family. Do you guys think we could do that?" I asked them, and they both said sure, they could go along with that. And Sue kicked it off. She said that she appreciates that Bob washes the car. In addition, Bob mows the lawn. It's very helpful. Bob threw in there, he said he helps with the grocery shopping. He went grocery shopping with her last week. Sue appreciated that. She also said Bob always unloads the groceries from the car and helps to put them away. Bob also mentioned that he watches the kids when Sue goes to visit her mom and whenever she goes grocery shopping. Sue mentioned that Bob does drive anywhere they go somewhere as a family, and because driving is somewhat stressful for her, she really appreciates that. Bob mentioned that he changed the oil in the car, put new brakes on the minivan last week. Sue added that he clips coupons for the newspaper, out of the newspaper for grocery shopping. And you can see we're already growing and developing a rich and thick storyline of who Bob is. This is a wonderful person. Bob added some more things. Sue finally ended up saying that Bob kisses the girls goodnight and says a prayer with them every night before they go to bed. So together with them, we just created a thick and rich storyline that Bob is, instead of the thin line, irresponsible and neglectful, a thick storyline, Bob is a truly great partner who loves his family and cares for them. So this just shows you a couple moving from a thin narrative towards a rich and thick narrative. And this is what a narrative therapist works to accomplish. Narrative therapy helps people to discover solutions for their lives by co-creating and co-authoring new stories.